My guest today is Arjun, founder and CEO of Doola, a company that helps anyone anywhere in the world start a business in the United States. Before building Doola, Arjun worked at Dropbox, where he learned how great products are built, launched, and scaled. But this conversation isn't just about startups. It's about removing friction. It's about what happens when someone sees a broken process and decides to build a better one. Arjun is helping thousands of founders turn their ideas into real companies without ever stepping foot in the United States. In a world full of red tape and roadblocks, he's building tools that make entrepreneurship more accessible and more global. This is a conversation about product, people, and the power of getting started. Arjun, so you spent a few years at Dropbox. What are 2, 3 key product or leadership lessons that still guide your thinking at Doola today?
The first is there's a very big difference in terms of how to execute at a company like Dropbox, which at the time was over 1,000 people, versus Doola, which when it started was a few people, less than 10. Biggest mistake is at Dropbox, when I joined, I was a growth product manager. I ended up becoming a growth product manager. And I saw that for any time we would ship a new product or build something, there was this process of you'd write a P0, which is defining the problem, then P1, which is getting approval, and then P2 is more approval, then P3 is more visibility, and then the P4 or P5 is when you'd start working on it. So I saw and said, oh, wow, this is a very thorough process for making sure everyone has visibility, communication, and shipping something. But at a startup, I remember the first time we were thinking about shipping something, I remember starting to write like a P0, a P1, a P2 doc. And then ultimately was like, this is silly. You should just go, literally, like, if you think of it, just go do it at this point, because you don't need to over communicate in that sense. You should document, of course. So the lesson to unlearn there, which is good to have in the toolbox now that we've grown and we aspire to be as big as Dropbox one day, is documentation's good, but bias to action and the speed is much more important at the earlier stages. So it doesn't have to be a P1 through 5. It could be a 1-page doc, which outlines the hypothesis for the clarity of thinking, and here's what we expect to see, and then boom, go do it, and let's come back. But that's very different than a 5-step process. So that's the first learning, is I'd say that what execution looks like at smaller stage versus bigger stage. Another learning is Dropbox, to me, is one of the most famous companies that cracked a viral growth loop, where if you share
I was
Dropbox,
going to ask you, you earn storage space if you refer a friend. So that's how I joined Dropbox, and I was trying to invite people so I can get some storage space. Yeah. So did you use like a virality like that at Doola, for example, or?
I think Dropbox is one of the companies that cracked and figured out a way to do that. We're trying to do that in Doola. I think that's the goal for any company. Is it's hard. Acquiring customers is very hard. But once you have a customer, how do you turn them into an evangelist? So the way we think about it is, can you incentivize them where they get a commission or give them a credit on their future subscriptions? But I think ultimately, none of those programs work unless you actually enjoy the product. If you think about anything you personally refer, you only do it if you personally liked it, because you're putting your neck on the line, your reputation, your brand's an extension. So that's my second learning from Dropbox, is they really figured out viral, product-led, usage-led distribution, where using the product, sharing a folder with someone meant they would see like, oh, what's this? Or there's the space race. How can we build or try to build something like that at Doola? And the third thing I would say is I just like the story of Dropbox, where the founder, Drew, was on a bus between going to Boston to New York. He had to write his thesis. He said, oh, cool, like I got a 3-hour or 4-hour bus ride. I'm going to carve out the time here. I think he was in the Fenghua bus going from Boston to New York. And then he pulls out his laptop. He's like, let me get my USB drive. And like, what is a USB drive these days? But he's like, oh crap, forgot my USB drive. Couldn't do anything. And that was the lightning strike of, oh, there's got to be a better way. So I like that story, because he then ultimately solved his own problem there. And in many ways, that's what we did at Doola, where we spent over $30K getting our first business set up, and we tried to scratch our own itch or solve it there. But I do like the story of how Dropbox started, because it shows that the whole world just operated with USB drives. No one took the action to say, hey, why can't things be done better? And I think that's what any idea is there's always opportunity out there. And unfortunately, the best ideas are typically 6 feet underground. It's a bit morbid, but people die with the best ideas because they never took action. And fear of failure, fear of what others will think, but anything in the world was created by normal people. They just ultimately took action before others did.
Yeah. And now let's rewind to day zero a little bit. So what was the moment that led you to start Doola? You just mentioned that you spent around 30K incorporating the company and setting up the entity, but was that for Doola or for another company that sparked the idea to start Doola after that?
That first company was a video messaging app. I got into
Okay.
Y Combinator. And the idea was, instead of doing a real-time Zoom call like this, or a Riverside or a Google Meet, you could post a Snapchat type story in a work setting. And you don't know what you don't know at those stages, but ended up paying close to 30K, if not more, in legal fees for IP transfers, for bookkeeping, accounting, a registered agent. Every email with a lawyer costs money. Just for sending emails, they charge a lot by the hour. And all of that racks up very quickly.
Yeah.
And then the company didn't work. So it was through that pain of, wait a second, the odds of a startup succeeding are incredibly low, but you don't do it for the odds. If you did it for the odds, no one would do it. There's much higher expected value type things you can do in life. But the thing that was eating at me was, hey, what if I didn't have to spend as much time doing those things? Maybe you increase the odds slightly. You don't guarantee it, but you increase the odds slightly. And that led to the idea of, okay, why can't there be this one-stop shop, click a button, done for you? Formation, the bank account, just all in one place, so that founders can focus on what they do best. And in this case, Doola handles the rest.
Yeah. And Doola solves a real pain for global founders. And how did you validate this idea before building the product? Because you were your first customer, let's say, because it born by your frustration and paying 30K to establish your entity. But did you validate that with other founders in the YC batch, or how did you validate that?
The validation came from getting paying customers. We felt the pain point, so we know it was real. We knew there were other companies offering a similar service to US-based founders, but it ultimately came from getting the first customer, who is an in-network referral, and then starting to get more and more. And I don't know how many it takes, but I've heard some people say, like, getting 50 non-affiliated customers. Because if you're affiliated, they could be your friends or family who are like, yeah, I'll try out your app for you. But 50 people you don't know to end up using your offering or product, then you're like, okay, cool. We have some product validation. You might not have product market fit, but you have some product validation. And that's what I would say is that's how we validated it. Is we started to get people actually paying, and you deliver the service. And there was no real software before. Our backend was Airtable. I would do all the filings myself on the IRS website. So like that was the product is you. You're kind of doing things behind the scenes after you sell it. And then over time, now we have moved off Airtable for our backend. We have lots of automation for different parts of the product. We have pure software offering. So that's today. That's over 4 years later. But when you're starting, we don't build any of that before we actually validate.
Yeah, so what part of Doola are fully tech-driven now, and what are some human in the loop still, you know? So at the beginning, I understand you need to be hands-on to everything in the back end. But now that you have grown, you are an established company now, how much of that is automated?
It's a mix. There are still processes which, because you have to use the state or IRS, will always be human in the loop. So formation, getting EINs. Taxes too is still human in the loop because a CPA is going to do the ultimate review.
Yeah.
Bookkeeping, similarly, there's a human who will help check, but a lot of it can be automated. And then there's offerings like analytics, which are more pure software, because your integration, or you're connecting to your Shopify, your Amazon, your TikTok account, your Google Ads accounts. Our belief, though, is that we're completely okay building human in the loop services, because we know that behind the scenes, there's a lot of things that traditionally as services might have been hard to automate or easier to automate now. And we also think for our type of ideal customer, which is typically one person running a business, having someone to talk to is helpful. So we understand that. And as long as you don't have to do it for every process where then it's hard to scale, we're very much I'm supportive of human in the loop. Our goal is we don't want to replace humans. We want to make them stronger. I think of it as our team is Tony Stark, and we're building the Iron Man suit to turn him into Iron Man. That's the goal. We're not trying to replace him with a humanoid robot. It's nope, we're going to turn you into Tony Stark, or we're going to turn you into Iron Man.
Yeah. And what has been the hardest part on scaling a tech-enabled service globally?
I would say for us, the hardest part which I think is the funnest challenge, but it's by far the hardest, is when you're serving small and medium businesses, really more small businesses, these are 1 to 10 people, it's very hard to acquire them profitably repeatedly. It's very different than, hey, if you're going after a Fortune 500 company, they're a much bigger company, they have a bigger budget, there's a list of 500 people, but to go after our market, you can't really just pick up the phone and cold call them. It doesn't make sense economics wise for having the sales rep and then you're trying to randomly hit someone at the exact time. So instead of having these spears, you have these nets where you're trying to catch people at the right time when they say, hey, I want to start a company. Oh, just Doola it. Go use Doola. So
Yeah.
I think the hardest part of scaling actually has been you can scale through channels unprofitably. You can just pay more on Google. And
Yeah.
like I'll put in $1 and I get 10 cents back. And technically you're growing, but you're not doing that profitably. Yeah, it's non-profitable growth. So I think the challenging is how do you find channels where, especially for SMBs, you don't pay as much. You can put in $1 and get $1 back and continue to grow there too. I think that's hard, but I think that's part of the challenge because if you can find those channels, inherently there's defensibility because other people haven't found them. And typically those channels compound over time. Things like content or brand or partnerships.
And I've seen you've been focusing on content a lot recently. So is that a profitable channel, you say? Do you recommend that to other founders to start producing more content? It will bring, so it builds trust, of course, but also it helps ranking higher in Google search or ChatGPT now. So what are some of the channels that you recommend that you have tested and been proven successful and profitable for you?
I think any founder should create content. Now, whether or not content will be the primary acquisition channel, that I don't know. It depends on your business model. If you're doing enterprise sales, content will help. Why? Because that person who you're selling to is a person at the end of the day. Maybe they're not on TikTok, but they're on some social media platform.
Yeah.
Or they follow someone. It could be a newsletter, whatever it is. But it doesn't matter if like the company's enterprise versus SMB, the content will build trust. I actually think content does 3 things. It helps you acquire customers, capital, and colleagues. So a lot of people just focus on, oh, is it going to help me get customers? But capital, investors are on these platforms too. They're able to watch you and build the business too. And even if you're not venture backed, it could lead to capital in terms of social capital or the last C, which is colleagues, where would you rather work at a company you know about or don't know about? You want to know more about it. That's the whole point of an interview process. So imagine someone's like, hey, I see this company Doola and I see this company like businessformation.com or like business formation bookkeeping tax. Doola is sharing every day what I'm doing, what the company's doing. We're highlighting our customers. So someone who's not even looking to find a new job is like, oh, this is kind of cool. Like I get to follow along. Even if the company has exactly the same, it's obvious which one you'd rather work at. You know more about one already. You feel like you were part of the journey. So I would recommend any, and I wish from day one, I wish I started every day just putting out content sooner. So like that's the biggest regret, but hey, better late than never.
Me too.
but I do think that ultimately everyone should create. And for us specifically, to answer your original question, the cost of creating content is the time it takes. And then there could be a cost for the team to produce it. But once it's out there forever. It replicates indefinitely. It can replicate its original software. Like it quite literally is software. So now the key is attention's the new oil. How do you create content that can stop someone's scroll and actually captivate them when it's easier than ever to create content? But it's only going to help. Maybe it isn't top of funnel, but it's how people will build trust, how again, more than just customers, there's capital and colleagues too. So I think every company should have it to some extent, but I wouldn't advise, because it would depend on the business, doing that only. You might have to do partnerships. You might have to do outbound sales. You might have to do product-led growth. Maybe there's a free trial upsell motion. Maybe there's community-led growth. So it would depend on the business, but I would say there's definitely a slice of the pie for every company that should include content.
Yeah, and that's how I came into Doola as well. Because when I opened my own company in the US, I opened it with another service because I didn't know about Doola. But then I saw you on social media, on LinkedIn mostly. And when a friend of mine wanted to open a company in US, I referred him to open Doola, and
Thank you.
Then you asked him. That's how we got in contact, basically. Then you asked him who referred you. I want to thank him, and yeah, now we are doing this podcast together. So
amazing. There we go. That's why you should post in social. So things like this happen.
Yes. Exactly. So how do you think about Doola? Is it a fintech company, a compliance platform, a service company, or something else?
I think every company eventually becomes a fintech company because you get more embedded or more vertical. And ultimately most businesses, they help you make money. I think
Yeah.
any business, or it's solving one of the three key problems. It's either helping you with health, wealth, or relationships. Any business, like if you really think about it, it's doing one of those three core desires. For us, it's the wealth bucket,
Mhm.
where we're helping you get an LLC to get your EIN so you can get a bank account or payment processor so you can get paid. And then we do your bookkeeping so that your taxes are ready so that your business stays compliant, but it's a wrapper. So ultimately, I think of us as, yes, we are a fintech company, but truly, I think of us more in customers' views as, hey, we are compliance. We're all that boring back office stuff, which you know you need to do, but you don't want to do. Not many people want to do any of it unless they're a CPA. I would bet most CPAs don't even like to do it too. It's their job. So if I think it's more fun to do it at Doola as a CPA too. So shout out if you're a CPA and looking to do it in a more fun place, like Doola's hiring there. But what I would say is we are helping people make money because we handle that back office stuff. So similar to
Mhm.
how I was like, crap, what if I'd spent less time on that versus building the business? You won't have to have that regret if you work with Doola. That's the goal. So yes, I view ourselves as fintech, but ultimately we say we're not a formation company. We're not a bookkeeping company. We're not a tax company. We're a business in a box. And the goal
Yeah.
there is that we just don't believe nothing in the law of physics says you can't have your bookkeeping, your taxes all in one place. No one says it. Like maybe a VC says, oh, but those are three different businesses. And what about just being distracted or acquisitions? Like that is true. Those are all very legitimate challenges, but
Yeah.
we know the customer, over 10,000 of them have resonated with this concept of, okay, cool. I can either get everything up front, or if I start, I know Doola will help me there, but I want the business in a box solution. So I'd say
Mm.
we're a fintech company, but ultimately we're a business in a box.
And yeah, that makes a lot of sense because, for example, in my case, I opened my entity with another service, as I said, but then I needed to find a bookkeeper and someone to file my taxes. So if I have them all in one place, it makes much more sense for me to not jump into different services. Uh, Now, for a founder outside the US, what are some of the biggest advantages of incorporating in the US? Why should they incorporate?
I'll give you my three top ones. The first reason is social proof.
Mhm.
Simply put, having a US entity gives you a level of social proof and credibility that no other entity can do. It doesn't mean you're illegitimate if you have something else, but a US LLC automatically opens you up to the US consumer market, which is one of the largest, maybe most lucrative market in the world. And automatically, you go from being a freelancer to no, I have a US business. So that's the
Yeah.
first reason I'd say the credibility and social proof. The second, though, is it unlocks access to the US financial ecosystem. So that's US banking and US payments, which we've heard time and time again not only also have social proof, but you have less dispute rates. They can actually be more effective and even less fees than other places too. So you get access to the US payment ecosystem and US tooling, whether it's banking, payments, eventually even things like credit, loans, etc.
Yeah.
The third thing I would say is it does depend on your business, of course. But I kind of mentioned this in number one. It's the US consumer market. It's such a huge lucrative market. So again, I would say you don't have to start a business and sell it to the US, but given our global economy, I think eventually, no matter where you are in the world, you're going to want to sell to the US. So at some point, to get access to the US economy or US customers, technically, yes, US customers could wire you to your Indian bank account, or they could, I don't know, pay you via Wise or something else. But typically, like they'll be way more comfortable with a US business bank account or US payment rails too. So I would say the third bucket, just to call it out, because I think it's important, is if you have ambitions some point of selling to US customers, you'll need a US company.
Yeah.
If you don't, that's actually completely okay. Then you can, you can operate a business from elsewhere. But to summarize, I'd say the credibility overall, the U.S. financial ecosystem, and the third would be the U.S. customer base.
Yeah. And one thing that gets overlooked, so you mentioned a little bit credit. So the more you process money in the US banking system, financial system, the access to credit becomes so easy. You can get a loan with one click, and next day you have the money in your account, so you can use to scale your business. And this is something that not many people know about outside of US. What type of legal entity makes most sense for startups? Is LLC, C-corp, S-corp? What should founders consider?
A lawyer will typically tell you the 11 things you shouldn't do. I'm going to tell you the one thing you should do. So I'm not a
Okay.
lawyer or a CPA, but I got tired of just not having a clear answer to this. So This is what's helped so
we
many
are not
people.
giving legal advice, just opinions.
Correct.
Based on experience.
Correct. Very simply, if you
Yeah.
are raising venture capital from a U.S. investor, form a C-corp. That's
C-corp,
actually it. U.S. investors will require it. It's how you can administer shares. Very simple. If you're not raising venture capital, form an LLC. It actually is that simple. The LLCs are easier to maintain. They have the tax flexibility. You could elect to be taxed as a C-corp if you're a U.S. founder, as an S-corp for tax savings there. And you get the flexibility of taxes. You get the less upkeep versus a C-corp, and you get liability protection. You can get a bank account too. So
and
it's
LLC
really that
has
simple.
also pass-through taxation, if I'm
Correct.
not mistaken, right? Yeah.
Correct. So by default, pass-through taxation.
Yeah. For those who are new to this, what is a pass-through taxation? If you can elaborate a little bit.
Yeah, in the US, the default tax classification for an LLC is anything that you would earn, it passes through the LLC and you just pay taxes on your personal taxes. So you get, again, the LLC is helpful for having liability protection. It can open up business banking. But for tax purposes in the US, if you're a single member LLC, you don't have to pay corporate tax on that LLC. It just passes through and you pay whatever your individual tax bracket is.
Yes. And now let's say I'm a startup. I want to bootstrap, so I start with an LLC. Later, I decide to get venture funding. Is it easy to convert from an LLC to a C-corp?
Absolutely. And that's the great question that we get is, hey, but what if I'm not sure? If you're not sure, start with the LLC. You can always switch to a C-corp or do it in the future. But really, I would say unless you are actively raising or dead set, like I'm not doing it. I want to raise venture, do a C-corp. Otherwise, you should do an LLC. You can always transfer or start a fresh C-corp in the future.
I see. So, okay, most VCs, so if you are raising, as you mentioned, you need to be a C-corp, and most VCs prefer Delaware C-corp. That's like the standard. Why is Delaware so dominant, and do you see any emerging alternatives to Delaware?
Delaware is the most attractive place, but also the most trusted because of the history. That's where most companies have been formed. And the court there it has standard rulings and procedures. It is the Chancery Court, which investors never know and trust, which is why that is the standard there. Now, there's been a lot of talk about, people going to Texas or other states too. I'd say for C-corps, Delaware still is the standard because, again, investors are used to it. The court there has used to upholdings and rulings around what happens for these venture-backed type businesses.
What about with the latest Tesla ruling, though? That scares founders a little bit.
It has scared people, but look, like we're also, I mean, I hope we get to one day where all formations run through Doola. So well, at least we're not seeing a major shift from first of all, two things. We actually don't work with mostly C-corps because we're focused more on the solopreneurs or the folks doing LLCs. Yeah. So we're not seeing a ton of volume there in the first place. But I do think at least now, I'd still say most folks are still doing Delaware C-corps. That's the standard. I guess things could change, like the Tesla ruling might have scared people, but on our side, we're actually working with more LLCs. And for LLCs, we see Delaware and Wyoming are the two most popular.
Yeah. What about Nevada, Texas, or Florida? Do you see them growing as well?
Those are popular states. That being said, we still see the single most popular state for non-US residents is Wyoming.
Okay. And if someone listening now is planning to open an entity in the US, what is the bare minimum it takes cost-wise and compliance-wise to keep an entity in good standing in Delaware, assuming zero revenue? So they are just building and they opened an entity, they haven't received any revenue yet. So what is the bare minimum somebody can be expected to pay?
The key compliance requirements for a non-US founder maintaining an LLC, or you need a registered agent. That's a requirement in any state for any entity in the US. You technically can buy a registered agent a la carte. That can range from as cheap as $25 up to $200 something per year. So that's for the registered agent alone. Outside of that, you technically could DIY everything else. You could form this. You can go to the state website, put the formation certificate of formation in, get your docs back, fax the EIN to the IRS. You could keep track of notifications through your registered agent, file your annual report at the state level on your own. Depending on the state, there'll be an annual state filing fee or an annual report fee. In Wyoming, it's $60 in Delaware, $300 in Delaware. So depending on those fees, that's another cost you'll have to do. So just taking Delaware, let's say Delaware LLC, or let's do Wyoming. Wyoming LLC, there's a filing fee up front. $60, and then you would have to file your annual report too, just over $100, get a registered agent as well. So you could technically, after that, like, you could DIY bookkeeping, you could your Form 5472 tax filing, you could DIY that too. So if you were truly taking the DIY approach, you're only paying the state fees. It's a couple $100, and then each year you're just paying the registered agent after that. That being said, the reason why we exist is because people, like, half those things you said I don't want to do or know how to do. So if I can pay someone also a couple $100, I get my time back, and then also they've done it for thousands of people, so they know that it's correct as well. That's who we're trying to serve, and there's a lot of folks out there because, like most things in life, if you can buy back your time, especially as a business owner, that's huge. Like, even just $300, we charge $297 for formation, registered agent, and your virtual mail address. I bet most people, if they just worked for a full day, they could probably generate $300 for their business. Or like, if they're getting their business off the ground, they should be spending that time figuring out how to get it off the ground. Because that's like the solve thing is, hey, the LLC thing, I get that, but what about finding the new acquisition channel? So that's the way I would try to reframe it, is actually you can go through and dollarize all the tasks that you do and how much ROI it is, and you realize your time as a founder is the most high leverage thing. So anytime you can outsource to someone you can trust who's done it, you can buy back your time to spend on things with more upside. Strongly recommend if possible. And that's why we exist.
What I like about US entities compared to European, for example, in Europe, you don't have a union level entity. You need to operate locally within each country. Where in US, you have it in a federal level entity and you can do business all over United States. But in US, you have the doing business in a state registration that you need to do. So what that actually mean for someone listening that doesn't know about that, and when should the founder register their entity as doing business in another state, for example, California, New York, or Florida, if their main entity is registered in Delaware, let's say, or Wyoming?
Yeah. I'll use Wyoming as an example, and also from the previous example, I think I flipped the numbers. So let's say you're doing a Wyoming LLC. There's a $100 filing fee that goes to the state to get the LLC formed. Then each year there's a $60 annual filing fee. That's just payment to the state each year. You're a non-US resident, so you have the Wyoming LLC. Let's say you then hired someone in Florida, or you now have a physical presence in Florida. That's typically the key for when you need to do the DBA or doing business as, is when it goes from digital to physical. That's how I would define it. So I think physical warehouses, employees, office, yes, any of those things. That's when you would need to do the DBA.
What about the virtual address? Does it count as doing business as?
So actually, let me clarify here. So doing business as is actually slightly different than a foreign qualification. So we'll actually split those apart. Foreign qualifications are when you're doing business in another state. So in the example we just ran through, if you now have a physical presence in another state, you now are doing business there, so you have to do what's called a foreign qualification, which sounds weird because you still have to do it if you're a US founder, but a foreign qualification is like, oh, my LLC is foreign to this state, but I'm registering that. Doing business as, and again, these are confusing because the words are kind of in both. That will typically come from, let's say, our parent company is called Distributed Inc. We do business as Doola. Right. So that what companies sometimes do that because they know, like, hey, I want an umbrella LLC for different brands that I build. And that's when, hey, if you're going to market or marketing with a different name, you can get the DBA so that things are tied together. So to summarize, foreign qualification is registering to do business in another state. Doing business as is typically when, hey, I have an umbrella company and I want to connect my name or brand that I'm going to market with that.
Same as me. For example, my legal entity is called World Presence Incorporation, but we are doing business as EU Presence.
There we go.
Can founders pay themselves from a US entity while living abroad?
Yes, most folks we work with outside the US, ultimately they remit funds. So what they do is they have their US bank account and then they send funds back internationally. And then when you pay yourself internationally,
pay themselves directly, or how, or
so
they
technically,
can
they could do a transfer from their US business bank account to their international personal bank account. And then there's usually a question that comes up around, okay, how do taxes work through them? Again, not a CPA, so you should always check. You can talk to our CPAs and our team, but At a high level, if you do not have effectively connected income in the US, meaning nothing physical, right? It's digital or it's online. Maybe you're using like Amazon's warehouses, or you're not using your own physical employees' warehouses. If it's all digital, any money you then earn, depending on the tax treaty your country has, so there is some nuance here, you just pay taxes in your home country because there's no physical presence here. So in this case, if you go US to your personal bank account internationally, wherever you live, you're going to have to pay taxes there. Like there's no avoiding taxes. We don't say, we don't tell people you're going to avoid taxes. No, but depending on the treaty, you're just going to pay taxes when you pay yourself in your home country.
I see.
Now there can be some tricky parts here. Certain countries, depending on the tax treaty, there might be an extra fee that's charged. But yeah, typically that's like a major misconception folks have for non-US founders, is that as long as there's no effectively connected income, you're not paying US income tax. You're just paying, especially if you have an LLC, it's passed through to your home country, and in your home country, that's when you're going to pay tax based on your tax rate.
Okay, and if you live in a tax-free country, basically you don't pay
So
any
Dubai,
tax.
for example, we have a lot of founders who live in Dubai, and in that case, they might, if they have a Dubai entity, pay a small Dubai corporate tax there. But then yeah, there's no personal tax there. So it depends on the home country ultimately, and that's why we are seeing a lot of folks from Dubai do this setup as well.
And in your opinions, should founders own equity directly or through a holding company?
I don't know if I'm qualified enough to answer that specific question. I don't know. I don't have a good answer there. Have you heard anything from what you've researched on that, of holding company risk directly?
Well, it actually depends. So if you only have one company, then it doesn't make sense to have a holding company to own that one company. But if you have multiple companies or services, then I think it's better to have a holding company, because you can structure all the equity and the dividends to go through one entity directly. Still, I'm not a tax expert. This is what I've researched online. So
yeah, yeah. I would think that makes sense though. I mean, I'm also saying because a lot of folks we work with, like there are some folks who might have holding companies, and with Doola, you can have an LLC own another LLC. So we support that too. But most folks just have one business or brand that they're working on. And also too, I also don't have a holding company set up. I'm just working with Doola right now. So maybe in the future I'll know more about that specific area. But I think what you said makes sense. If it's just you in a business, there's no need for it.
Yeah. And how important is having a US address or a US phone number when opening an entity or a bank account in the US? So I know when you open an entity, you have a registered agent and you have an address with that registered agent, but should you keep that address, or you can get another address with a virtual address service that, or Doola offers an address as well, if I'm not mistaken?
It is important to have both. I'll tell you why. For the US phone number, it's professionalism. Same way, if someone hits your website and they see an international phone number, it's just adding friction. So you can get phone lines pretty cheap. Like you can get a Google Voice number or a Skype number. There's a company called OpenPhone, which offers a really good phone line too. So
used to be Skype number, not anymore.
Nice. Very cool. Yeah. So I again, the phone number, you're gonna need that if you're applying for US tooling, etc. Technically, you could do an international number, but I feel like it's a relatively low cost, like maybe $10 a month. So in the grand scheme, it's a good thing to have there. In terms of business address, correct, you can use your registered agent address to start. I would say eventually, though, it depends on what your business is doing. If you're anticipating lots of mail, you could get a standalone dedicated virtual mail address. So we work with a company called Virtual Postmail. They can get you an actual, a different virtual address, which is built for handling more mail. It then ultimately depends on the bank on whether or not they'll accept the registered agent address for banking. Otherwise, you might have to get a new standalone virtual address. So ultimately, it depends. But I would say if you're a non-US founder, you can use the registered agent address to start. Depending on the bank you apply to, you might need to use a third party like Virtual Postmail or something else to get a standalone separate business address.
Okay. And can a non-resident founder open a US bank account without ever visiting the US?
Yes, you can. Now, again, this depends on the bank. So a bank we work closely with is a bank called Mercury, because they let you actually apply internationally. Some banks will require you to come in person, but that's a great question, and a myth to dispel is that you do not need to actually visit the US to open a US bank account or open a US LLC. So yeah, great point to call. It's worth saying that you actually can do it remotely. And I think that's really cool that the US even offers that and allows that.
Yeah. And if you could redesign the US incorporation system from scratch, to better serve the international founders, what would you have changed in there?
Well, this actually, I don't know if this would help Doola, because it may make it easier for everyone to go on their own. But I think the world would be a better place if the IRS and states had APIs, because then a lot of these things could be automated.
They don't, because I think they certify a few providers to automatic filing, or
no, we'll have flying cars and humanoid robots before the IRS says you don't have to fax forms to get an EIN. It's pretty wild, but some states are a bit more tech savvy. Wyoming's a bit more tech savvy, but that's what I would say if I could rebuild it or change it is I've even thought, like, if the IRS would let us, we'll pay for the engineer. We'll staff them. When I tell them to go there, we'll do it pro bono to help. But I think it would help because ultimately it's a better experience for the person applying for their EIN, because it's pretty wild. There's like a stack of papers that are getting stamped and sent back. So yeah, technology is usually slow to be adopted in government areas. So that's how I would rebuild it, to just make it more tech focused from the beginning. Other than that, though,
the corporation would be much faster.
Everything would be faster. It'd be clearer,
not taking
too.
2 weeks or more to incorporate an entity.
100%.
Yeah. And how do you see global entrepreneurship evolving? So, and what role does the US still play in that ecosystem?
The world's getting flatter than ever, especially now. Anyone from a laptop, maybe not even them, it could be them with AI agents, can build companies faster and outsource parts of themselves faster. So I do think that the future of what workforces look like, our team is global. I think it will continue to be global, but I think that will become more of the norm, where the only issue there is time zones. But other than that, everyone, what's wild is, like, a billionaire and a sixth grader both have an iPhone, like the same technology. So like the world's getting flatter, the same tools will be available to people. So in terms of what role the US plays, I still think the US consumer market is going to be lucrative. Like in different places in the world, that is where maybe trends are set, or that's where customers are. So, but in a digital environment, I think it matters a bit less, right? Because you can sell to anyone globally. So that's my prediction, is just that workforces and teams get more, or they continue to get even more distributed globally, and it'll just become more of the norm, where you have these maybe even fractional members of the team that are just plugged into different portions. And we have to build a team globally because our customers are global. But I think even if you're a company that's serving people in just the US, I think your team eventually gets more global over time.
And at Doola, how do you structure things? So do you allow people to work from home remotely, or are you all in the office and work together there?
We're fully remote or distributed.
Fully remote, okay.
In New York, we have a office or headquarters where folks come in 2 days per week, Tuesday, Wednesday. So it's hybrid in New York. I really like that because I think it is important and nice to have some central spot where people can meet. So last week we had a leadership offsite where folks can all fly in and we have a central hub. If we're meeting partners or have a meeting, we can use this hub or space. So I like having that satellite office, or like that hub. We have an HQ, but then the whole team is global. And over time, if we have certain areas where there's a critical mass or a concentration of Dooleans, people on the team, we'll do a similar thing where we have an office. So Bangalore, India is another place we're likely going to get an office soon because the team's growing there. And similarly, we can have a space. It'll be a place where people can go in, use for meetups, use for lunch, use for partnerships, and has that congregation spot where you can, again, I think there's definitely benefits to remote where no one can tap you on the shoulder and distract you. But I also think that especially at startups, getting tapped on the shoulder is how you innovate. It just happens faster, the trust you can build, the speed of iteration. So
which one do you prefer more personally, remote or work at the office?
If we could, like, it's a bit tough because our company's global, customers are global. So we realize at a certain point we have to go fully global. If I could, like, I don't know if I'll have teleportation in our lifetimes, but if we could teleport the team together every day, I would do it. So I would prefer the in-person. And I think, again, that's because the pace of communication, and especially at startups, which is so important. If you're operating a company at scale, then maybe in-person is actually worse because you don't need to change or deviate. It's just like, no, just we need to do what we do and minimize for distractions, etc. So I would prefer teleportation. The whole team comes here, then you can teleport back to India, teleport back to the UK for dinner. That's not the case. Like the flights or supersonic flights coming.
So it's coming with boom, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So at least in the interim, I'd say hybrid. That's what I would prefer. But yeah, if teleportation comes, I would say in person.
Yeah, even myself, I'm between. So me personally, I like working at the office, but at the same time, I like working in the office personally, but also with the team, because that's where ideas shine, in my opinion. So when you have these immersive conversations and when you gather together and discuss about new features or how to better serve the customers. But also I like the flexibility of not being tied to a physical space, and that also it makes you more flexible on location wise, and also at the same time it doesn't it gives you more talent pool to hire, so you are not constrained anymore in your physical address and hire in that radius people. Now you can hire globally. So I'm between. I still haven't made my mind which is better. Maybe a hybrid, or I don't know. Now I wanted to close with some rapid fire questions.
Sure.
So if you had to start a company tomorrow outside of tech, what would it be?
Coming back to those pillars, I think there's health, there's wealth, there's relationships. I think I would do something in health. I think that the two things that impact you in life, whether you want them to or not, are money and health. So I think health is something that comes for all of us. I think it would be in the health space in some way, shape, or form. I don't know what it would be yet though. So we'll keep it as that. But it'd be something in health that helps people improve their health or improve how long they can live.
Founder you admire the most, dead or alive?
This might be a bit atypical because it's not like a tech startup, but I read this book Endurance, which is the story of Ernest Shackleton, and I thought his leadership in the book was really cool. So yeah, maybe not necessarily a founder per se there, but I thought his book was really interesting. And if I were to pick to answer though, let me pick. I'm a really big fan of Brian and Dharmesh from HubSpot. A bit biased because I think there's many parallels between who we're trying to serve in HubSpot, but I would say them because they built in the CRM space. Every single person said you have to go up market. There's no market for SMBs. They definitely zagged when everyone else zigged. They defined inbound marketing. So instead of having outbound sales, it's like, no, we're going to create content and build these nets and have people come inbound to us. So huge fans of what they did, and I see many parallels with what we're trying to achieve here too.
What is your favorite productivity tool or system right now?
Tool is I use this thing called Things 3. It's like just a really nice note-taking app. So I just like that tool. It's built into my workflows. And then my productivity system, it's actually up right here on my computer. It's like pinned to my first tab. It's called the Arjun Mahadevan matrix. So it's like just the quadrant of urgent versus important. And then just has pillars. It helps me just prioritize like what do I actually have to do versus what can I delegate or eliminate, etc. So that's something which I more recently started using, this Eisenhower matrix, but it's really helped me be intentional about, should I do this? Should someone else do this? Or do I need to do this thing first? And then the final productivity hack is if it takes 2 minutes or less, just do it. No matter what. Like, doesn't matter the time or day. If it takes 2 minutes or less, just do it. Don't wait till tomorrow.
Yeah, that's a very good tip. The book you gift or you give the most or recommend most often?
I've most recently gifted The Daily Stoic, which is by Ryan Holiday. Every day there's a Stoic teaching. The other book I've gifted or recommended a lot is Atomic Habits by James Clear. Those are the top two.
Best $100 you have ever spent?
This might have been a bit more than $100, but I just bought a... Actually, okay, no. I was going to say, it's too early to tell. I just bought a Ninja Creamy, which is this blender which helps you make ice cream. I would say, but it's a bit too early because I'm still using that. I'd say it's probably, honestly, this blender I bought where I can make shakes every day. I think that was about $100, but just fun to use every day.
What's one thing you think people get wrong about Doola?
We're trying to change this, but it's hard, is we don't just do formation. We do the bookkeeping, we do the taxes, so existing businesses can work with us too. So that's what people get wrong. They're like, oh, it's just a way to start a business. But nope, if you have an existing business, we can support you too.
Okay. Well, Arjun, thank you for joining me today. It's clear you're not just building a company, but creating path for others to follow. And to everyone listening, keep building, keep going, and remember, sometimes the hardest part is just getting started. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me on.